Hi, my name is Linda from Your Dark Shadows channel. Our topic today is Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid Story. This documentary was produced and directed by Mary O'Leary, and it's my pleasure to tell you that Mary is with us today to talk to us about her documentary. Also joining us is Will McKinley. Will and Jonathan Frid, along with a fan committee, worked on the first ever East Coast Dark Shadows convention, which was called Manhattan Shadows. And joining us is Helen Samaras. Helen will tell us how she saw an ad in a collectibles magazine, which brought her to her first of many Dark Shadows festivals. Thank you, and without further ado, here is Mary O'Leary.
Please, would you share with us a little bit about the reasons that you decided to do this documentary and your process?
Linda, I'm delighted to be with you today and all your wonderful viewers. I was approached by Jim Pearson, who has worked for Dan Curtis Productions and also MPI Media Group. And he said that they were very interested in doing a documentary on Jonathan. And he had known me over the years and during my time of working with Jonathan, and I had worked many years as a soap opera producer and was currently available. And he said, I just thought you would be a perfect person. And I said, I'm thrilled to be able to do it. So MPI had a budget that they gave us, not a lot of money, but a budget. And I basically sat down and started figuring out, what is it I want to tell? What is the story of Jonathan Frid? And that was over time of thinking, and of course I was doing research through my own files. I went on a preliminary survey to Canada to do research up there, also see where we might film interviews. I talked to people in New York that I wanted to interview, actors in LA I wanted to interview, would compose questions, and I would set up sessions. Jim would hire the crew, the videographer, sound, lighting. And we began to do the interviews, and it was really helpful in the first few. I began to realize how important theater was in the story I was telling. Jonathan loved being on the stage. So I began to formulate what was the theater to him. What was the theater to me, too, frankly. I love the theater, and when I originally wrote a letter to Jonathan in 1985, I actually talked about my love of theater and one-man shows, and it impressed him so much he picked up the phone and called me. So
Nice.
A big part of the documentary is, of course, my working relationship with him, that he selected me to become the co-producer of his theatrical production company, Clunes Associates. He selected the name from his heritage, his Scottish heritage. And it was an incredible joy to go back over those years we had worked together, to talk to his family, a few of whom I had met, because when he retired back in 1994 and went up to Canada, I had visited him several times and met some of his family members, but it had been a long time since I'd seen them. And now was coming from the perspective of, what am I going to ask them for the interviews? But it was an incredible journey. I'm thrilled that the documentary has been very well received, both in terms of film festivals, the Emmy Awards, and just the fans of Dark Shadows writing to me and telling me how much they learned about Jonathan, and was thrilled to see what a kind, generous-hearted gentleman he was.
I think that's something that what struck me in watching the documentary is this was an amazing man. And could you tell us a little bit more about your travels with Jonathan on the road?
When I began to get bookings for Jonathan, I was working on the soap opera Guiding Light. It was told to Monday through Friday, but we get vacation time, and sometimes his bookings were on the weekends, not too far from New York. So I would accompany him as a stage manager, not all the time, but certain times I would take, say, a week vacation when he was booked at a series of Penn State University campuses. There are 23 in the Penn State University system, and he performed at 17 of them over the course of a few years. But he would have a week where he would do 5 to 6 performances. And that was a wonderful time, because I would be driving and he would just tell stories about his life. I mean, he was a great storyteller on stage and a great storyteller in life. And I learned a lot. And a lot of that I remembered as as I was formulating the documentary. And there was a time when we had gone to the college, we had a technical rehearsal, went back to the hotel just so you could rest a little bit, and then would drive back for the 8 o'clock performance. And one time I got us lost. And there was no GPS at the time, no cell phones, and we were in a very wooded area and everything looked the same. But I said, don't worry, I'm going to get you there. I'm going to drive back. I'll find the right road, which I did. We got there about 10 minutes of 8. They, of course, were concerned as to where we were, but we made curtain. So there were a few adventures that I look back and laugh about. I had driven him to Rhode Island, which is where I'm from. He performed at a few colleges there, Rhode Island College, Brown University, and of course Salisbury Junior University in Newport. I had stopped to see my parents one time en route to the performance venue, and he looked at my parents and said, do you know your daughter's a speed demon on the road? So I was like, oh, wonderful. Thank you for telling my parents I was speeding. We had a great sense of humor. That's what I always remember about him. And he was just a really wonderful friend. If you were in need, he was always there for you, but he never expected accolades. He never expected that you really got necessarily reciprocate. He was just such a kind-hearted individual. And as I talk about in the documentary, a mentor to young people. Mm-hmm. And he did want to be an actor. And I recently had the opportunity to spend time with Laura Parker. Of course, sad that she has passed.
Yes.
But she remembers, she said that, and she had told the story many times over the years, that when she was first playing Angelique, she would cry because I'm just feeling so terrible about how I've been treated. And he said, no, you're the villain. You have to be delicious in your hate and jealousy. And she said he was an amazing acting teacher for me.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, I hadn't thought about that. But she delighted in working with him. And she said also, he was always so humble. And I said, yes, he was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I find it interesting. I know that Jonathan had trained to become a director, and how interesting it would have been if he had really taken off with that particular career.
Yes, he absolutely, after graduating Yale with the MFA in directing, came to New York as pretty much everybody he had worked with. I mean, the people that were students were desiring careers in the theater, whether it was playwriting, acting, directing. But he knew how to get into acting. He got an agent. He would go on auditions. I think he found it much harder to determine, how do I get directing jobs? It's not, you don't audition in the same way. So I think he fell back on what was easier. And of course, he was truly gifted at acting. And then the years went by, and suddenly it wasn't until 1993 when David Moore, who was professor at Georgia College, and had brought Jonathan to do 2 of his one-man shows there, said, how about you come here and direct a play? And suddenly he lit up and said, wow, I'll have my official debut directing in 1993 when he graduated from Yale in 1957. So he had a wonderful time. Of course, Marie Wallace, who had been his co-star on Dark Shadows, played Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she had just a wonderful, wonderful time working with him. She had great stories about they stayed in a great Georgian mansion there that was on the campus. And that was quite a fun place to stay.
Well, thank you, Mary. Do you have one last story or one last tidbit that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, I think the most important thing is that I continue to promote the documentary. I've had people who didn't know Dark Shadows, didn't know who Jonathan Frid was, come up to me and say, I really love this documentary. I learned so much about this person. And they had no idea this huge icon he was. I mean, he did appearances in the 1960s and thousands of people would show up. I mean, like he was one of the Beatles. I really want as many people as possible to see it and get to learn about Jonathan. So I continue to, wherever I can, such as here with you today, tell people, please go look at it. It's on several streaming services. Amazon, although I prefer people would rent it and not have commercials in it, because Freevee, which Amazon has pushed forward, interrupts it too many times. Yes. I didn't design it for any interruptions. And it kind of was painful to watch how much they would chop into it.
Mhm.
And you just have to sort of click the other button that says other options and rent it for $2.99. But it's also Tubi, which also has commercials, but they're very respectful. There's maybe
Mhm.
3 interruptions. It's also, you can buy on DVD and Blu-ray. However, a fan wants to watch it. I just want people to watch it
Absolutely.
and spread the word for others to
Mhm.
watch it as well. Because it's very hard as a producer to get the word out there. Yes, it's on services, but people don't, there's so much to choose from, they don't necessarily know it's there. So I continue to, via social media, talk about it, and in interviews with, like this today, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today, Mary.
Okay, thank you, bye-bye.
Bye now. Will, would you tell us a little bit about when you wrote a letter to Jonathan Frid and what happened after you wrote that letter?
Well, it's interesting because, in the documentary Dark Shadows and Beyond, the Jonathan Frid Story, both Mary and I talk about sending Jonathan a letter, basically expressing our interest in working with him. In fact, my professional relationship with Jonathan actually goes back about 2 years before then. He, when I was still in 8th grade, Dark Shadows began airing in reruns on WNBC Channel 4 in New York. And I had seen the movie. My father, who was my, the sort of curator of my classic film and television viewing, said, "Oh, there's this old soap opera about vampires. You'd love it." And he showed me House of Dark Shadows, which spooked me. And that was my introduction to Dark Shadows. Then when Dark Shadows began in reruns in April of 1982 on WNBC in New York, I started watching and got hooked. And eventually a sort of like fan community formed in New York. And the two folks who ran the fan group in New York, Patrick and Josette Garrison, got in touch with Jonathan. And Jonathan got involved with the planning of the first ever East Coast Dark Shadows convention called Manhattan Shadows that happened in September of 1983. And Jonathan was not only a guest at the convention, but he actually was part of our committee meetings. We would have meetings at Jonathan Frid's apartment. And it was strange because he became like a friend. He became a sort of a colleague. And, and this was the guy that we were all fans of, the person that we, the star of the show that we were all celebrating. And we were having our committee meetings around his table in his apartment. So Jonathan, I met him probably when I was maybe 14 years old. And over a period of about a year and a half, I would help him with sort of like clerical duties. He would give me giant accordion folders full of memorabilia and fan letters, and I would take them home and organize them and label them. And I remember, because I was too young to get around on my own, my parents would pick me up from his apartment in New York City, and my mother would look at him and be like, "How do you get him to do these things for free? I can't even get him to clean his room." So, so finally, after a certain point, I had done all of these sort of clerical responsibilities, and he was sitting at his desk, and Ann Wilson, who is a name that Dark Shadows fans will recognize, gave him some scripts that New Jersey Network had prepared for him to do these on-camera pledge spots to get viewers to contribute to the public television station in New Jersey that was airing Dark Shadows. And he was practicing them, and I overheard it, and I was like, I could write better scripts than that. And I was 15 maybe. And he said, "Okay, well, go write them, and I'll tell you if you're right or wrong." So I went home that night, came back into the city the next morning with a stack of scripts, like, half a dozen scripts that I had written. And much to my shock, he liked them all. And he did them. A few weeks later, New Jersey Network came to the apartment and filmed these pledge spots. And then a few weeks later, they were on television. And I was 15 years old. Not only was my writing on television, but the actor who was my idol was saying the words that I had written, which was very, I have to tell you, for a teenager, for somebody who was not even old enough to drive, it was a very surreal experience.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Frid. New Jersey Network is a public television network, your television network. That means you have a stake in its unique programming like Dark Shadows. But it simply cannot continue to provide out-of-the-ordinary programming without your support. Show them that you agree, and that New Jersey Network is a home for Dark Shadows. Make your pledge now. And by becoming a member, you get a mug just like this one as a thank you gift. It's really a good deal. By the way, this mug is filled with coffee, not with, well, you know what I mean.
And after that there was a Dark Shadows special that aired on New Jersey Network, and I went and answered phones, like in the, background as Jonathan was on camera. And after that, I wrote to him and said, I'd really like to work on something, formal with you. And coincidentally, at the same time, he got a letter from Mary O'Leary, who had been watching the show on television, basically saying the same thing. I'd like to work with you. And I happened to be over at his apartment when he received Mary's letter or had it in his hand. And he said to me, have you ever heard of Mary O'Leary? And as a regular viewer of The Guiding Light, it was a name that I recognized from the credits. And I said, oh, you mean the producer of The Guiding Light? And he said, yes. So you've heard of her? And I said, yes, I have. Well, I see her name every day in the credits. And he said, well, she sent me a letter and she wants to work with me. Are you willing to meet with Mary when I have her come over? And I said, well, 15 years old or whatever I was like, well, let me check my calendar. It's like, yes, I'll be available for that. So we all sat together early April 1985. And Jonathan had been, sort of toying with the idea of doing a one-man show and doing kind of proto versions of his one-man show at fan conventions for a number of years. And in fact, I think that was really why he became so involved in the fan conventions, because he had an eye towards using this platform to launch what was essentially going to be a new career for him. So that's a very long answer to your question about the letter that I sent to Jonathan. But yes, there were two letters. They both arrived to him at roughly the same time. And it was definitely a moment of synchronicity.
Would you, I kind of put Mary on the spot on this one. Would you like to share one more Jonathan Frid story, or tell us a little bit more about Jonathan in your eyes?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a million. It's hard to pinpoint one because there was so many. Jonathan, as I said in the documentary, Mary and Jonathan definitely became friends. And, also Jonathan became friends with our colleague, Nancy Kersey, who joined our team, the Clunes Associates team, a little bit later. And both of them would, sort of hang out or socialize. And I was always very conscious of, I liked being a fan. I did I identified as a fan. And I love the fact that Jonathan appreciated my work, and I love the fact that he gave me opportunities that nobody else, certainly would have for somebody who was that young. But I also, in a weird way, I was very protective of my sort of like fanishness of, um, you know, of Dark Shadows and of him. Um, so I we didn't really hang out and socialize, but there was one instance where we would get together, we would work, I would have a job, I would go say on the weekends and find short stories and poetry and possible things to include in the one-man show and bring them back for Mary and Jonathan to review, and we would talk about the one-man show and what was going to happen and what had to be done, and then I would go. There was one instance where he sort of went kind of above and beyond the sort of like work relationship, and that was my high school graduation party. He came on the train from New York City out to Long Island to the backyard of my parents' house in Woodmere, New York, and along with Mary, and attended my high school graduation party. Now, from my grandmother and various other, sort of women that were at my party, they were very struck by the fact that I had a TV star at my high school graduation party. And not only did Jonathan attend, but he sat down and talked with my grandmother and talked with my other grandmother and talked with these ladies who must have wondered how in the world is a guy who was a star of daytime television at this kid's high school graduation party. And that was just one of the examples of him. Jonathan showed his appreciation, not necessarily, in terms of a paycheck, because I was a teenager and I didn't expect to get paid, but he was extremely supportive. And, one of the stories that I found for him to do in his one-man shows was called Dead Call. And I used that story as my thesis film for when I was in NYU Film School, and did a short film of it. And he came to the premiere of the short film. And this is now, a couple of years later after we had been actively working together. But he was just a very supportive person, a very genuine and appreciative person. And, there's no way that I couldn't give you advice on how to find somebody like Jonathan Frid in your life. If you were 15 and you were like, tell me how you did it, because I want to do it. It can't be done because it was unique to this person, to this individual. And, you'll talk with other people, like Jonathan had young people that he gave opportunities to in the Dark Shadows days, who worked for him as his assistants. And that's just who he was. And I was just lucky enough for the universe to put us together, in the same moment in time. And, I will always be appreciative of that.
Absolutely. I love that. The universe put you two together. What a wonderful story.
I mean, it put Jonathan and me together, and it put, Mary and me together, and it put all of us together. It's sometimes you can plan those things, but sometimes the best ones that happen are the ones that you don't plan and could never even imagine.
Thank you, Will, and thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Helen, thank you so much for joining us today. And I understand you wanted to share with us a little bit of information on some of the Dark Shadows festivals, which our viewers are very interested in knowing more about.
I found out about the festivals in 1984. I've been a collector my whole life, and there was a magazine called Collectibles Illustrated, and every issue, which came out every other month, had articles about all different things. You could have been interested in model cars, paperback novels, anything at all. And this one particular issue happened to have had a big article on dark shadows, which I had no idea that it even, existed anymore. Because when the show went off the air, that was it, for me. And so this is the magazine that I actually, that I saw, and the issue came in. I'm just thumbing through the pages, and all of a sudden, what do I see in the back of the magazine? But this. And at the end of the magazine article, it says, for more information, because there are Dark Shadows festivals, write to this address. And there happened to have been a festival coming up in a few months. So it was November of 1984. My sister and I attended our first Dark Shadows festival. And I just was blown away, because I thought that we're going to be the only ones here. Who's going to possibly be interested? There couldn't be other Dark Shadows fans that would be interested in this. Well, over 1,000 people at that particular festival. It was held in New Jersey. And it was just, absolutely amazing. And one of the first people that I did run into was Jonathan. He actually had an encounter with my sister. The two of us were never the type to just sit in a chair and let someone entertain us. We both had a lot of nervous energy, so we volunteered our time. So we were one of the volunteers at the festival. And so our job was to just do like little assists, helping actors, telling people you're going to be on in an hour, try to find this person. And so they were waiting for Jonathan to arrive, and he was a little bit late. And he walked in, my sister spotted him from across this big area that we were in with hundreds of fans around us. And so she went up to him and said, excuse me, they're waiting for you on stage. And he just got all flustered, and he was holding a music stand. And he takes the music stand and goes, here, hold this. And he gives my sister the music stand, and she gives me this look like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? And she looked even more flustered than him. But, there went Jonathan, he went on stage, and, the rest is history. And, that was my start of the festivals, and I was hooked. From just seeing that man do that, I'm saying, that kind of person. And they had festivals up until the 50th anniversary of Dark Shadows. And I attended, every last one. So I've grown up and grown old with the festivals. They've been in a number of places. We started off in New Jersey. I actually missed the first festival. They actually started Dark Shadows festivals because there was a group called ShadowCon, but that's before my time. So I missed the first festival. So I went from 84 on. The first few in the New York area were in New Jersey at Newark Airport. There was a couple that were in Dallas, Texas. We had Los Angeles, Las Vegas, by Disneyland. So they've been, it's usually the east or west coast, because that's what try to get to areas where the actors were living. So it was easier to, to fly them in. If the festival was in New York, you had local area people that just came by taxi, and they flew in some of the actors that were on the West Coast. And then the reverse, when the festival was in Los Angeles, they flew in the ones from New York.
Well, and tell me, I remember reading something, I don't have a lot of detail, but wasn't one of the sites very close to where the World Trade Center was?
Well, it was the festivals were there. It was the Vista, and then it was the Marriott, and it was called, the Marriott at the World Trade Center.
Oh, okay.
Because in fact, the very first bombing, the bomb was in their parking garage.
Oh my gosh.
That's the one where only 8 people or something like that, were killed. So it happened right there. And the hotel wasn't totally demolished during the World Trade Center disaster, but there were people that were there, and we were just there just before 9/11, because we had the festival 2 weeks before.
Tell us some more stories. Tell us about festivals, maybe some more things that are coming to mind, if you would.
Gosh, it's like 80 zillion of them.
Well, we have time for maybe 7 zillion.
See, I was very fortunate to, besides, the festivals, I own a travel agency. So I did the reservations for all the actors.
Ah,
So whenever they were coming in, so, I got to know them on a different level, than the others. So yes, I might have been escorting them, being their security, person at the festivals, but I had a one-on-one with them because I was doing their reservations for them. So, Jonathan, I did most of his one-man shows, all over the country. I was sending him all over the place. Lewis Edmonds, who only lives about an hour from me, I used to visit at his house all the time. So we're very, very close, with him. Marie Wallace, Donna Laundrie, and they, all of those people were, when I say regulars, I did all their travels, not just for Dark Shadows Festival, where the others, I just did them for the festival. So, it was very cool. And now I'm getting stuck because I'm trying to think of a story to tell you.
I put you on the spot.
You put me on the spot. Yes, you did. Because I have to worry too, because some of them are a little bit risque too. And
Oh
we're just
my.
off the air, so we don't want that happening. I don't remember the year. I don't remember on this, but Jonathan was going to be doing a show in the Midwest, and I was sending all the fans, to hooking them up with their air reservations, hotels, to go out there. And I was so darn busy with that, and it was a busy time of the year for me. I wasn't going to be able to attend, which is unusual because I always managed to find time to go see Jonathan, whatever he was doing. And one day he called me up on the phone, and he said, "You're not going to be able to make the show." And I said, "I'm so sorry. I am just so busy. There's just no way that I can do it." And he says, "Well, I got an idea." I said, "What?" He says, "Well, if you can't go to the show, how about if the show comes to you?" And I had no idea. But what are you driving at? He goes, "I'll come to your house." He says, "I know your family cooks. You provide the eats, I'll provide the entertainment." And so, and I said, "Can I invite a few friends? Would that be okay on that?" Absolutely. So he did a private show for my family and a few of my friends.
Oh,
And
that's so Jonathan. Yeah.
That was Jonathan. He performed in my dining room. And the rest of us were sitting in the living room, and he did, because it was really more like a rehearsal for his show that he was doing in the Midwest. So that was really so cool. And whoever thought, as a kid when I watched the show, that first that this man would ever know me by name, and that he would be in my house, and that was really just just wonderful. And unforgettable experience for all of us. Now, my family, although they remember me watching Dark Shadows, none of them were Dark Shadows fans, so they didn't understand about this. So they were pretty much, meeting him for the first time, and they, just all, hit it off, together. So that was really, a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing your stories of Jonathan. Appreciate having you with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.